as your validation and verification, you will still need to deposit your CPEs into your own accounts. We have a great program planned for all of you today, and we're going to introduce our panelists in just a couple seconds. If you are wanting to follow along on social media or post your own thoughts about today, we encourage you to do so with hashtag ISE webinar, or excuse me, ISE Fireside as your hashtag. We'd love to have you share some of your thoughts today on your social media handles. So let's take it away, panelists. I'd like to introduce all of you. How y'all doing?
Wonderful.
Doing good.
Excellent.
Good to have you here. First, I'd like to introduce Joey Johnson. Joey, would you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Joey Johnson. I'm Chief Information Security Officer at Premise Health. We do on-site and health and virtual health for large self-insured employers.
Well, thanks, Joey, and thanks for joining us today. And Laura, would you be so kind to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Laura Wynyard. I'm the Global Chief Information Security Officer for DLL Group. And I'm also a fellow at the Institute for Critical Infrastructure and Technology.
Thanks and welcome. And Rob, would you be so kind to introduce yourself?
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, everyone. So I'm Rob, CEO and co-founder of Cycognito. We're a security company that helps security teams understand how attackers actually see their IT ecosystem and what attackers can actually potentially do to their assets and information. We believe that one of the most fundamental challenges and problems in cybersecurity is understanding what's the attacker's path of least resistance to your assets coming from the offensive security side of the house. We know that that's what attackers actually do. And to be able to do that, you have to understand what you actually have and map your assets, but then stress test everything. If you know half of the attack surface, or if you don't test everything, then obviously these halves of the unmonitored attack surface will be targeted by attackers. So that's a very interesting challenge. And our approach is indeed run reconnaissance, the offensive security flavor of reconnaissance, where you get no input, you don't deploy anything. You map these servers, applications, and devices from the attacker's point of view, stress test everything, and understand what are these 5 or 10 Git servers or Jira instances, exposed directories, or even mainframes sometimes that attackers will obviously target once they look at the organization.
Thank you, Rob, and thanks for introducing Cycognito a little bit today. We're really appreciative that you're our sponsor this afternoon. Let's go ahead and dive into our discussions, folks. Our first topic is going to be target acquired, the strategy of cyber attackers. As we know, cyber attackers are looking for the path of the least resistance into our organizations and specifically your attack surfaces. And the first blind spot that they come across, they're going to find those assets and take full advantage and exploit them. Attackers will find those vulnerabilities to exploit and then move laterally through your organization. And ultimately, the security team that's waging an information war against the cyber criminal and not seeking most of your important data IP first, but rather the information that will grant them the access to your infrastructure. So they're going to continue to probe those assets and keep looking through the infrastructure and really identify and try to exploit those weakest points. So what I'd like to ask you guys today is for your perspectives on a couple of things. First, your perspective on how the attack vectors might have changed, that we have been working remotely and did so for many organizations so quickly. And how is your security team locating and managing these enterprise assets now that our perimeter and our network topology and just our overall work dynamic has completely changed in the new world? And if there's been any cyber attacks out there that might have kind of raised your eyebrows. And, you know, we always say in a cliche, keep us up at night, but love to hear your thoughts and insights. I'm going to ask Joey to go first.
Sure thing. Thanks. So, you know, I think a lot of organizations, as we went into this whole home isolation thing, found that they were a little bit, I think, better prepared to work remotely, at least from a pure tech perspective. But, you know, there's a lot of ancillary things that people didn't count on, and we're starting to see attack vectors, you know, come around a little bit more. Things like you can work from home, but did everybody really anticipate that all your employees are going to have echoes or, you know, Alexas at home that are able to pick up on things? And so, you know, getting through to those things is a different attack vector. Getting through to people's home routers is a different attack vector that can have corporate consequences. I think when you think, you know, about that in a sort of a broader perspective, it's interesting because if you think about yourself as an individual, you have a digital footprint, right? Through social media, through where you bank, what you do, who comes to your Ring doorbell, all these things kind of create this footprint of who you are digitally. But organizations have the same thing, right? And as we've come to a point, you know, it's not new to say the perimeter is gone, but I think one way that folks don't think about it a lot is that technology is so readily accessible to individuals at this point that it's very easy for someone in your workforce to do, you know, quote unquote work or work activities using technologies and capabilities that you did not provision to them. They can spin up servers in AWS, they can collaborate with other developers and use whatever platforms they want. There's all these different ways that they can access technology because they're not necessarily dependent on the company for that. When that happens, you begin to have digital assets out there that you have no visibility of, but that can be detrimental to you if they're exposed.
Laura, what about you? What kinds of insights do you have to share now that we've I know you do work remotely because your team is distributed in many parts of the world, but you know, what are sort of some of the things that you've seen, and how is your security team locating and managing your enterprise assets now?
Yeah, so like everyone else, we went full work from home. I think we have a skeleton crew of maybe 1% of our staff in offices, not the security team, but DLL as a whole. And we had taken great efforts toward the end of last year to really focus on treating everything as untrusted, right? This whole zero trust methodology. And while we do have managed assets, right? So they're managed by a mobile device management system. We went full Office 365. And we enabled conditional access. So unless they're on a managed device with, you know, the MDM solution installed and protecting that device, we do not allow access to any Office 365 environment. That was a little bit of a challenge with a lot of our contracting companies that we partner with, but we've worked through that. We have an old Citrix environment that we're forcing them to go through, not old, like as in vulnerable, but not necessarily the easiest and fastest way. So we've been fortunate in that. One of the things that I've seen most prevalently in our company is the uptick in phishing, anything around coronavirus, COVID-19 update, you know, CEO spoofing, where, you know, many people are getting emails from our CEO saying, you know, urgent coronavirus update, please read a message from your CEO, things like that. But we've put some decent measures in place. Of course, you know, the business is complaining, as they always are. You know, we don't like the way this looks or whatever, but I think we're doing okay. I think there's huge rooms for improvement, though.
Thanks, Laura. So Rob, maybe you could give a different perspective. How do you think security teams can really detect maybe the lateral movement through an organization? And what kind of security activities and tests do you think security teams should be locating and performing to assess and patch these vulnerabilities as they're identifying them?
Yeah, I think that Joe and Laura touched a few key points here. Companies obviously prioritize their business continuity. People are working from home and they have to have access to these internal applications, internal networks, and to be able to move quickly, organizations sometimes have to quickly expose these specific new gateways or old gateways where the configuration has to change quickly, reconfigure some cloud environment, and deploy new security solutions too. And the challenge when you move that fast is that any human mistake in these new reconfigurations or new assets that are now may be accidentally exposed to anyone with an internet connection can create a huge problem. So we advise our audience here to make sure you know what IP ranges your cloud providers are using that are relevant to your assets. Make sure you have a good understanding of the SaaS solutions you're using, and you have a good mapping of the instances and their configurations. Learn what partners have access to your applications and your networks. Many of these critical attack vectors that we're seeing are based on these kind of connections. And even collaborate with the finance teams to make sure you're not missing some of these cloud environments or SaaS providers. And we're definitely helping many companies in this exact mapping process. And in terms of lateral movement, we're actually seeing, when you have these knowledge management system that is now accidentally exposed to anyone with internet connection, and you're accidentally exposing some of your credentials or project information, you don't even have to run a very thorough lateral movement. Sometimes you don't have to run any lateral movement to get access to extremely sensitive data. So especially in these times, understanding what's actually exposed, what's attractive to attackers, and what they would find first within the first few days or weeks of such a reconnaissance operation seems like a top priority.
So thanks, Rob, for sharing your insights. Let's go ahead and change topics now to talk about a little bit about the challenges and limitations of our current cyber defenses. Enterprise security teams all the time are working diligently to protect IT infrastructure and assets. And I think I could say they're also working in overdrive to deal with our new world of remote working. But the tools that they're relying upon, and Laura, you kind of mentioned this with your own infrastructure, but they haven't changed much compared to how much the exposure levels that are out there. You still have the global threat of context going on. And of course, we all know that the perimeters and the whole network, again, topology has changed. So organizations have really had to expand and broadly diversify their IT resources on premise and in the cloud, as Rob just kind of alluded to. So it's really made for some very complex environments overall. So I'd like to ask Laura to kind of go on for this topic first. How does your enterprise possess IT resources and firmly on-prem or in the cloud or hybrid of the two? And so how is your security perimeter challenged the way you approach cybersecurity? And how are you continuously monitoring your environment? And what obstacles, might have been in place or are in place for you to actually feel like you're doing that correctly?
Yeah, so first of all, I think, we're a lot like many companies out there. We have a large volume of security tools. And, someone has the best of intentions to deploy that security tool to its fullest, and then something shiny comes up and you abandon that and go do something else. And, the majority of companies, I've worked for some pretty large ones, you have a ton of tools and they're maybe fully utilized to maybe 30–40% of their capability. Then you have all the extra tools where, or all of these tools where they're not all talking to each other and they're not all correlating information. And so that's a problem. We're trying really hard now to kind of do a left turn in our security strategy, and actually focus on data and everywhere, a data-centric security posture, as well as zero trust and security by design. I think the ways inherently that we've all been doing it in the past, it's just we're way too far behind. I don't think we'll ever get ahead. Actually, I know we'll never get ahead, but I would like to be able to close the gap and be able to get as close behind the bad actors as possible. And right now we're light years behind them.
So when you say pivoting to the left, so are you really building out a data classification system and sort of evaluating it from that perspective?
Yeah, so, you know, inherently we've gone by network and applications, and now we're going to go predominantly by the data itself, and track that and do data flow diagrams and identify everywhere that our data is, and utilizing some tools to do that as well, to identify sensitive confidential data stored in places that it shouldn't, traveling in places that it shouldn't, unencrypted, and we'll focus on that. I think the other thing too is the zero trust, which we sort of started that at DLL already, but we need to really take it to the next level and trust absolutely nothing. It used to be in security, we went by the Ronald Reagan motto of trust but verify. Now we trust nothing.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I think that's probably a wise move. Joey, what about you? How does your security team gain its visibility into unmanaged, unknown, and abandoned assets? And through this whole transition into the remote workforce, I'd just be curious to see if you found any of these abandoned assets or things out there.
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, I think the first thing to identify there is asset. And it's how an organization defines what an asset is. You know, Laura made a good comment around data centricity, and that really is the key, right? Nobody, as a CISO, I honestly don't care if somebody takes over or attacks my firewall, right? Now, it means there's a problem on the shores, but that's a means to an end, right? What they're really after is the data. They're really after something there, whether that's intellectual property or data that can be resold or something like that. So certainly, I mean, as workforce pivots, I think there's inherent challenges to a security team. One of the things that I've always been a big proponent of is that you need to let the data in your environment, however you define your environment, tell you the story, right? So threat intel and things like that are great, but you have to be able to assemble a narrative, and you have to be able to assemble a narrative that makes sense for your organization based on the context of your organization and what you really need to protect. When you completely pivot how that organization works, that becomes more challenging. The contextual clues that those analysts were trained to look for have started to change, right? I'll give you a specific example. We have clinical workforces who now have to work from home. Well, it's one thing when you take your corporate workforce and have them work from home. When you take a group of people who don't spend most of their day in front of a computer, they spend most of their day in front of patients and with each other, they have now lost an inherent ability to collaborate. And so they're going to try to do that with existing technology that's there for them, which creates different data flows, different workflows, different things that have to be protected. And in that, different things that analysts and security teams have to understand what that is and understand what to look for. And you have to be a little predictive about that. Kind of goes back to my comment around technology is so available to humans right now that, especially in an environment where not everything is happening on-prem, there's a lot of opportunities for team members to find their own ways to solve problems. And that's when you end up with digital assets out there that you are completely unaware of. And it's difficult. There are proactive ways you can try to go do that. There are tools that you can look at, both freeware and things that are available through the marketplace that will help you do some of that discovery. But even in that event, you have to know what you're looking for to find it, right? You have to have some kind of indicators that you're saying, hey, this is what I want to find. I mean, Cycognito's tools, I'm very familiar with it, and it's a very impressive technology. That's not a deliberate plug. That's how I feel. But even in that case, you kind of have to be able to say, hey, here's what's important to me, right? What if you just did a new acquisition of an entity, and now there's these different things that you have to look for, or there's different conversation around that going on? You have to be able to point to it, because otherwise you'll get a stream of data that may or may not be usable or actionable.
So great points, Joey. Rob, I just would love to get your perspective, how enterprises, we all know, no, I should say enterprises have been really relying on some penetration tests and vulnerability scanners, sort of traditional type of technologies as good evaluation tools for decades. So somewhat of the legacy aspects of cybersecurity. Do you have some examples for us of maybe why these tools might be not enough for today's world? And you know, what kind of levels of awareness leading the enterprises that traditional vulnerability scanners and penetration testing are not sufficient, but why maybe cybercognito would be, you know, would be, you know, the right fit for these kind of scenarios. And I don't want a product pitch. I just kind of want a perspective of what your customers are seeing and all that good stuff. And, you know, please share. We'd love to get your insights on this.
Yeah. So that's a very interesting question, because coming from intelligence agencies to the defensive cybersecurity industry, what's been a bit odd to us is that attackers run a top-down process, meaning they would either look at a specific organization, then try to map IP ranges, product names, subsidiaries names, and then try to find these either SaaS solutions or servers out there and so forth, while security teams, for the most part, and especially around security testing, are relying on technologies where you have to specify what you want to look at. So either it's a pen test or a vulnerability scanner or other capabilities that ask you, hey, what IP range do you want to test? And when you use this kind of an approach, by definition, you will miss between 1% to 99% of your attack surface. What we're seeing is that most companies are unaware of between 30 to 70% of the assets. So to leverage the attacker's approach here, for example, and that's an unknowns problem. So you don't know, like Joy said, what you need to look for, even in many cases. Some security teams are unaware of certain subsidiaries they have that have access to some of their assets. So to solve this problem, you actually have to scan and map these 3.5 billion servers and devices connected to the internet. And you have to use business context and content to understand what's what. And you have to build a data model that is not a simple one-dimensional list of IP addresses, because that doesn't say anything and it doesn't help you find this N+1 SaaS solution or server or gateway or even subsidiary that you were not aware of. So you have to use a graph data model that creates additional context and knowledge based on these few or many things you do know. For example, if you run natural language processing and entity extraction on things like your web applications, your SEC filings, news pieces where the companies mentioned, and so forth, you can map these subsidiaries. Then within these web applications, you can map these links and product names and even visual elements like logos and sometimes even favicons that are relevant to this company, or configuration files that are uniquely related to this specific company, or some of company name, its subsidiaries, its products may be mentioned in these configuration files. And if you build this map of what's connected to the internet, you can then go look at random, AWS assets and so forth regarding things that are exposed and related to these names, logos, files that are uniquely tied to this company, and eliminate this shadow risk, these unknowns that you simply cannot discover based on these 20 years old technologies that ask you, hey, what's your IP range?
Thanks, Rob. I think it's a great pivot or transition into our next topic, is because what you were saying is more of a passive approach to looking at this. But I think what you're trying to say is the empowerment of the security teams to go on the offensive is really the answer for the next generation of all this. Would you kind of concur in that, and to get ahead of these cyber attackers? Would you agree with that?
Totally. Logically, there's no other way that we have found or anyone we talked to.
Maybe you could dive a little bit more into some of the automation of helping specific enterprise in reclaiming the attack surfaces and offering better visibility in the prioritization of assets. And should we be mapping the attack surface for assets? And if so, do you think we should be doing so to test and verify the accuracy? And how often do you think we should be updating on a large scale?
Yeah, so ideally you want the data sets to be updated on even an hourly basis. And if you have these few critical assets that you know about, you want it to be updated even more frequently. The problem is that if you have this Git server, for example, its configuration may be changed at any time. And if this Git server is exposing an Intel or an NVIDIA's source code, just as an example, or the CRM or Salesforce instance of this other company, then it's a race between the security team and attackers regarding who finds it first. So if you use a data model and an approach where you're solely basing this on known IP addresses and domain names, you are doomed to fail. It's an impossible challenge to solve using that old approach. So the question is, how do you understand the business context of these assets and make sure you focus your resources on the areas that matter most and that are the most attractive to attackers too? We believe that to be able to do that, just like real attackers, you have to leverage the business context of these assets. What are these problems? What are these platforms? What data is probably deployed in these assets? Do these assets provide access to other networks and other applications? Are there credentials or other PII or other information that can help for these next attack phases? Most of the breaches, I believe, are based on some compromised credentials used. But in most cases, companies don't know how attackers got them. In many cases, you have this directory exposed here, exposing this bash history file or a similar one, exposing dozens of credentials, and then attackers will leverage them in another application. So you have to use this business context and data that quickly allows you to see insights regarding the top 10 assets or applications or servers or IoT devices that are the most exposed ones and attractive to attackers, and invest your human resources in those areas. If you have to send 1,000 queries to this feed or platform, or if you have to ask these pen testers, hey, in these couple of weeks, please look at these couple of applications here, which are essentially 1% of the attack surface, then that's not very efficient, and it doesn't say that the company is secure.
Thanks, Rob. So Joey, I'd like to get your perspective. How much time would your team to have on hand to perform some of the reconnaissance or recon into your own enterprise, and why would you be doing so? And what would be the top factors for you guys to prevent security teams from taking an offensive and proactive approach against cyber criminals?
All right, that's a lot to unpack. So the first thing that I would say is actually piggybacking a little bit off of what Rob said, which is really important, which is that, you know, I kind of have this analogy I use a lot, and some people have heard me use it, which is kind of like the Chinese wall of security technologies, right? You can build it forever, but you can't wrap your arms around the entire world and protect it. You're just not going to be able to do that. You're going to hit exhaustion. So today, if you look in China, you'll see displays of certain portions of the Great Wall of China. You go way out into the Gobi Desert and you see it's crumbling. That's because there was not enough resources, enough manpower to continue to hold that up. So you need business context to kind of see what's out there. And you know, that kind of goes back to my point earlier of, because technology is so available to users, you can know the SaaS applications you have, you can know everything you pay for, you can know everything you sanction with your organization. But people are people, and they can take matters into their own hands, and that can leave you with gaping holes that you got to be able to see. And then be able to determine how you want to apply your resources to it. So one of the biggest, I think, paradigm shifts that I'm seeing, thankfully, happening with a lot of security leaders that I respect is recognizing that, risk acceptance is just as important as risk mitigation. You need to know some things that are out there and say, we're not going to focus on that because we got to focus over here, right? If you protect your diamonds with equal vigor as your toothbrushes, you're going to save more toothbrushes and lose more diamonds. Nobody wants to do that, right? So as we look at that with what our security teams are doing, to be able to be effective in seeing everything that's out there is very difficult. It requires discipline. It requires a dedicated focus, and it requires ability to develop business context and make those decisions. There are some organizations that are at enough scale that they can really, really do that effectively, but most are not. It requires a lot of discipline to know how to not run down the rabbit hole all the time and spend a lot of time in cycles putting protective efforts at things that aren't really getting your best mileage for that. So, when you kind of put all that together, there are things within our organization that we do. We have our teams kind of looking externally, obviously, but there's no one organization as an army, and we require resources and support to do that, and it requires focus.
Thanks, Joey. Laura, I'd love to see what your perspective is here, and maybe do you think automation might help your enterprise in reclaiming its attack surface visibility and prioritizing the assets there?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot that can be done with, I don't want to, the term artificial intelligence and machine learning and automation. The important thing is to, know what you don't know, right? And, obviously, as was said before, know what you're willing to accept the risk on, what you're not, what is unacceptable. There's a lot of capabilities that are in our arsenal, but a lot of it has to do with manpower, how many humans you have, automating administrative type stuff that really bog down a security team is pivotal. Using Bayesian theory of probability to be able to say, all right, well, there's a probability that, an 80% probability that this is a legitimate attack versus, it's only 20% that it's a legitimate attack, so that you can at least prioritize what you're going to look at and when. I think those are really helpful, trying to get those things in a corporate setting are difficult. Trying to explain, something like that to your board and trying to get budget for those types of things, which are exceedingly expensive, is another battle. I think that the best that you can do is the best that you can do. And if you're going to try and solve for everything, you're going to burn out. Your entire team's going to burn out. You're going to get a lot of depression in your team, a lot of stress in your team. You're going to have a high turnover rate in your team, and you don't want that.
No, you definitely don't want to overstress your team
Sorry,
whatsoever. Want to add something, Joey?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one little comment on the automation bit. The thing is, we need to conceptualize the fact that when you talk about threat landscape, the threat landscape is not a static environment. It is a highly dynamic environment. The threat landscape that existed for my organization is dramatically different right now than it was even when we started this webinar. That is how quickly things are moving. And so if you're not using automation mechanisms to identify what that is and be able to adapt in real time, you're bringing a knife to like a nuclear warhead fight. That is the only way you're going to be able to do it. And
a paring knife, even.
Yeah, exactly. And when we look at our adversaries, that is what they are doing. They are using automation techniques, just as Rob led off earlier. They're looking top down. They want to, if they have a target, they are looking at every possible capability of how they're going to get into it. And remember that you are dealing with a mentality and a group of people that are both highly financed and morally bankrupt. And when you put those things together, a lot of possibilities open up, and none of them are good for you.
Completely agree. So we're going to shift gears, and we've got several questions actually from our audience today. First, I just want to say to our panelists, thank you so much for sharing your insights, but your job is definitely not done. I've got some questions for you. And if folks, if you guys have questions out there, let us know in the Q&A window of the screen, and we'll do our best to answer them in the time that we have remaining. So my first question is from Andrew Raymer. And he says he's seeing a lot of organizations automating operations. How have your approach been to the automation changes due to the COVID behaviors that are out there? So I'm assuming that he's referring to the remote workforce due to COVID-19. So Laura or Joey, would you want to take a stab at that specifically?
Sure, I can kick it off.
Sure.
So here's my philosophy on automation. You want to automate what you want, not what you have, right? You can automate tons of bad processes and just fail really quickly, even quicker than you did before, right? That's not the point. The point is, where does automation bring value in repetitive tasks and things like that? So you have to understand the narrative and the problem set you're trying to solve. I'll go back to the example I used earlier where we have a lot of clinical providers who are used to working face-to-face that are now leveraging IAM platforms or Teams or things like that in ways that they were not before, right? And so we said, well, now we have a new set of variables that we need to look for and identify. And then once you can identify what those variables are, you can begin automating ways to either detect that, enforce protections, whatever you need to do. But again, that is just another example of a constantly changing threat landscape. This one being, self-introduced by good people in the organization trying to do good things, but introducing vulnerabilities to the organization. Imagine a manual way with, thousands and thousands of workforce members of trying to go out and find out what everyone's doing. That's insanity. You'll never do it. So you have to find ways to anticipate what the problem set is going to be and find automated ways to go out and discover, is this a real thing or is this not really a significant problem?
Laura or Rob, do you have anything quick? Because we've got a few other questions that I'd love to dive into. Do you have anything to add from Joey on that?
No, I was just going to say the one thing, when you have a bunch of people working from home and you have everyone saying, oh crap, now I can't do things the old school manual way because I'm not in the office and I can't print that piece of paper, or I can't scan that document, or I can't, walk over to so-and-so's desk. People start getting creative and they don't go through the appropriate channels. So it's really important that during automation, things go through change control, they go through security review, all that stuff. Processes, while they should be more efficient, they don't go out the window because we're working differently.
Okay. Well, our next question is from Anna Breen, and she's asking for one application of data in SPC. We're trying to use a software and a product quality controlling process to make sure that the CPK equals 1.33 or more so that 99.9% of the products is good. What's your comment on new tech to improve it? I might lob this one over to Rob to kind of give his thoughts on this one. Don't forget to unmute us, Rob. All right.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I'm not sure I understand the exact process that Anna is referring to.
She's also asking about application of AI or machine technology that can be used in medical devices and manufacturing. Yeah. So in the inspection process, any hard products with software in mind to recommend. Would love to hear your thoughts on this.
So on recommendations, I bet that Joy and Laura can share more. On the general approach, I would just mention that employees and organizations' behavior has drastically changed, obviously, over the last few weeks or a couple of months. And now organizations and security teams have to find these cornerstones of what must not change or what must be constantly monitored. And to try to understand what are these extra elements that may not be monitored, whether it's new assets, new users that may now have control or affect the data of solution or how this AI machine works, that may completely affect the result or may make you completely blind to something you have well monitored until a few weeks ago.
Okay, thank you very much, Rob. Let's go on to our next question. It's from James Lemieux. I can see how the analysis of results produced are different, but how is the scanning process for Cycognito any different from what we've been able to do with something like Nessus or even Qualys today? In other words, is there something that's really unique about your scanning process? And maybe Rob, you could take the lead on that question since it's a somewhat of a product question.
Sure. Glad you asked, as they say. So there are a couple of levels here. First, regarding the discovery piece, Qualys or Nessus will only look at these IP ranges that you ask them to scan. Our process is we don't ask you to provide us with anything, because if you're aware of half of your attack surface, or say that you have this partner that has this Cisco ASA or a Citrix NetScaler that provides access to your network or your asset, the Qualys will be completely blind to that asset, even if it can't find this relevant CVE, just based on its approach, which is 20 years old. And back then, when you had 2 servers connected to the internet, that was totally fine, made a lot of sense. Today, companies have hundreds of thousands of exposed assets. So that's on the discovery piece. Regarding the pure vulnerability detection piece, we're doing 3 things. A, we also do vulnerability detection, but B, we orchestrate pen testing, open sources and tools, stuff that, you know, this pen tester will run for 10 days out of the 14 days of a pen test before they go to the last couple of days of the actual reverse engineering. So that's something we do that vulnerability scanners don't do at all. And then we have a large research team that is building modules that automate what sophisticated attackers / pen testers would do manually for these couple of assets, only that we run that on a huge scale. And one of the interesting proofs to that is that just a few days ago, for example, we have found a couple of zero-day vulnerabilities in a very popular product of a multi-billion-dollar security company based on automatic scanning, something that their pen testers and automated vulnerability scanning, such as Nessus, could not detect. And that combination, I'll just wrap with saying that the combination of discovery and understanding what's the actual attack surface and the stress testing of everything related to your data is the only way to understand attackers' path of least resistance.
Thank you so much, Rob. I want to thank all of our panelists today. You guys are absolutely awesome, and thanks for sharing your thoughts and perspectives. If you guys would like to get in touch with Cycognito, Rob's contact information is up here on the screen, and I want to say a special thank you to Cycognito for being our sponsor today. There's a survey coming your way, folks, so please fill it out. And if you need CPE to earn one, you will be able to do so. Just turn in your CPE number to us, and we'll make sure that you get the validation to upload your information to your credits. With that said, I look forward to seeing all of you on Thursday, May 7th for our next ISE Fireside webinar at 2 p.m. You can register at 10-inc.com. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed our program. I hope that you are all staying healthy and staying safe. And we look forward to seeing you next time. And again, many thanks to our awesome panelists and Cycognito today. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.